Recently, a friend and I marathoned BTOOOM, the 2012 action anime that's equal parts survival game and Bomberman. Despite its many ups and downs, I really enjoyed it, and I'm pulling for a second season even with the bizarre circumstances surrounding it. But for all my enjoyment, while watching BTOOOM, there were a number of bizarre details that gnawed at me, distracting me from the action and pulling me out of the tense atmosphere the show established. Naturally, I was quick to be critical of these problems and wanted to make a video exploring them. The two biggest issues dampening the atmosphere and breaking my immersion were the following. Where is the shrapnel, and where is all the action? The main weapon that each character in BTOOOM has access to is called a BIM. It's a small, throwable bomb that comes in 8 different types, each with a unique offensive or defensive function. There's just one problem though. When a BIM explodes, its casing doesn't break apart to produce shrapnel. For a series predicated almost exclusively on bomb-based combat, such a minor detail seems like a hideous oversight at face value. This is especially true since many of the characters in BTOOOM regularly avoid what would otherwise seem to be fatal explosions, usually without even a scratch. While there are some times that the BIMs launch pieces of rock and debris after an explosion, the BIM's casing itself never fragments into shrapnel. It was a great source of distraction when trying to watch the show, as, even with my limited knowledge of explosives, this was clearly highly unrealistic, even for such an extraordinary premise. You could make the argument that I may as well levy this same criticism against grenades in video games for how trivial it seems. And there is some merit to that idea, but video games are constrained in so many ways by their mechanics and engines. Sure, manga has editorial and artistic restrictions, but if an author is attentive enough, this is the sort of thing that would make its way to the pages of their work anyway. It has a direct impact on making the characters seem almost invincible, which distracts even further from the action and flexes suspension of disbelief to breaking point. However, reading the manga reveals that BIMs are far more complicated than they appear at first glance. They are much more than simple bombs or grenades. In Volume 10, Ida reveals to Sakamoto that the outer casing of a BIM is nothing more than a removable safety lock, and that the explosive power comes from an inner casing filled with a mysterious clear liquid. It's entirely possible that the casing is made of a material that simply evaporates in the explosion. While there is no real-life counterpart to this, at least that I can find, this kind of intricate futuristic technology is not without precedent in BTOOOM. Consider the radar that each participant has embedded in their hand. It can't be removed without surgery or death, it's constantly streaming audio and visual data, it's a two-way radio, and it can be used to locate other players at the drop of a hat. Next to that, a bomb that evaporates its casing as it explodes isn't too tough of a pill to swallow. It makes even more sense if you consider that Tyrannos Japan, the video game company funding the death game, seem to want the experience to be as close as possible to their hit game BTOOOM, which, as it's a video game, probably doesn't have any shrapnel either. However, most of that information isn't revealed until later chapters of the manga, far past where the anime finishes, meaning the shrapnel issue seems like more of an oversight on the author's part than a rational aspect of BTOOOM's universe, if you only watch the anime. So what about the second problem? Despite the fact that BTOOOM is most definitely an action series, in many ways it's fairly light on action too. That is to say, with maybe one or two exceptions, all the action seems only to take place with Sakamoto smack bang in the middle, with pretty much nothing happening off screen. But what causes this kind of narrative solipsism? To answer this question, we need the answer to 2 more questions. How many participants are on the island, and how big is the island? By the start of Volume 2, the manga makes it clear that there are 32 active participants in the game, but in the anime it's kept vague because not all the characters had appeared in the manga yet. There is a group shot on the plane ride and there are 28 visible contestants, but the shot is brief and it's unlikely a passive viewer would count them out. Not knowing the precise number of participants results in a more uneasy atmosphere, one of a constant and hidden threat, but that atmosphere seems like a facade when no important action occurs outside the protagonist's plotline. If there's an explosion in the distance, it's directly tied to what the protagonists were already doing or planning to do, rather than just being background noise indicating a living and breathing world. It's obvious why this was omitted in the manga. It's kind of a waste of time and panels to depict what I'm describing unless directly tied to the plot. But the anime would have had more license to do this since it has the luxury of audio instead of drawn sound effects on a page. As for the sides of the island, there are no official dimensions, and the closest thing to an official map is this handy chart in one of the volumes which doesn't provide any measurements. By volume 13, with 19 people left alive, it becomes abundantly clear that the island is massive enough that conflict could easily be uncommon. So the answer then is disappointingly simple. Where is all the action? Well, there aren't enough people and the island is too enormous for there to be the atmospheric background combat you'd expect in such a setting. I'd still argue that the focus is still a bit too heavy on Sakamoto and crew, but once again, the issue seems to be in the way the anime disseminates information, rather than whether the information exists at all. So can we consider these problems a failing of the anime itself? It's hard to say. The BIMs not fragmenting into shrapnel was a great source of distraction and quite immersion breaking, but Ida's information from volume 10 manages to explain away these concerns, which happens right after where the anime ends. Similarly, by not revealing the exact number of players, the anime was able to build a more suspenseful and anxious atmosphere, but it let itself down by failing to deliver on that suspense. After all, it adapted a story where the reader always knows the number of people left alive. Was it wrong to trade knowledge for ambience? Not really, but the BTOOOM anime could have greatly benefited from waiting until the next manga release so it could foreshadow or lampshade some of the more important details of its universe.